Hello to all my fairies, fools, and phantoms. I'm your host, Anita Hathaway, and welcome back to Something is Rotten in the County of Denmark, a true crime podcast investigating madness, mayhem, and potentially murder. For any new listeners tuning in today, hello. I'm happy that you've found this dark little nutshell in the infinite space that is the modern internet. And to all of my return listeners, thank you for coming back. I'm glad to know I haven't scared you off just yet. Today officially marks 2 months since I arrived in the small town of Elsinore, Ohio, and to say it has been an interesting 2 months would be the understatement of the century. Now, this is the part where I must apologize to all my return listeners, as I'm about to give a recap of the past 3 episodes for anyone just now jumping in. I know these recaps are tedious, but I promise it will be brief. My journey into investigating the strange goings-on in Elsinore, a small town in Denmark County, Ohio, began 2 months ago when I received a very interesting call from an old friend of mine. Horatio and I did a semester abroad together my freshman year of college, and he had listened to my podcast last year where I investigated the slew of murders in the Dunsinane mines in Scotlandville, West Virginia. He wanted to know if I would be interested in investigating a mysterious death that had occurred in his friend Hamlet's hometown. Given the fact that I have never been able to say no to an investigation, I packed up the van and drove over 600 miles from New York to Ohio. Upon arrival, I learned that the mysterious death that had occurred was actually Hamlet's father, the former mayor. Apparently, the death had been ruled as being the result of natural causes, despite the fact that Mayor Hamlet was perfectly healthy. But that's not all. Shortly after the mayor's death, Gertrude, the mayor's widow and Hamlet's mother, marries a man named Claudius, who was the former mayor's best friend. Not only that, but Claudius has also been named the new mayor. I know. Strange, right? Horatio told me that Hamlet suspects there was foul play involved in his father's death. And to be honest, I don't blame him. A lot of things in this town just seem off. The situation in this town seems to be getting even more bizarre. Both Claudius and Polonius, the head of the city council, who seems to have his finger in every pie, if you know what I mean, have been acting very shady. Plus, 2 of Hamlet's old friends from school, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, have shown up in town out of the blue. I'm pretty sure there is some big secret that Horatio isn't telling me. And, to top it all off, Hamlet himself has been acting very odd. Horatio always described Hamlet to me as clever, eloquent, and a pretty good friend. While I'll admit that Hamlet is certainly witty, in the weeks that I've known him, he seems almost bipolar. One minute he is incredibly somber and morose, and the next he's cracking jokes and practically bouncing off walls. One moment he's methodical, and the next he seems almost mad. I'm sorry that was somewhat of a long tangent. Repeat listeners know that one of this podcast's biggest flaws is that sometimes it could use a little more matter and a little less art. Anyway, all of this to say, I'm still no closer to finding out what is happening in this town. But I am determined to find out. I'm about to head out for the day, but I just wanted to record this check-in first. Apparently, a troupe of traveling actors has come into town, and Hamlet has organized a play that is going to be put on in the local theater this evening. I'm headed out to watch their final rehearsal, and maybe see if I can get closer to making heads or tails of this town. Okay, everyone, it is a little past midnight, and I just got back to my motel. It's late, but I felt the urgent need to come on here and talk about everything that just happened. Time is of the essence, because I feel like big things are about to start happening a lot faster. So, like I said earlier, I spent most of the day watching the actors rehearse. They all seemed quite skilled at their craft. I watched 2 of the actors rehearse a fight scene where one of the swords snapped in half in the middle of the fight. He played it off well, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't planned. The more I watched them rehearse, the more excited I became to see this big spectacle that Hamlet has been talking about all week. Speaking of Hamlet, he was right there in the center of it all, demonstrating movements, showing actors how to speak their lines, etc. Given his previous behavior, it was odd to see him as such a hands-on type of director. Though, if I'm being honest, he gave some pretty decent advice. At one point, I caught him saying, "Suit the action to the word, not the word to the action." Given the fact that theater is a lot about giving action in life to written words, this seemed a pretty apt piece of advice. About an hour or so before the play was supposed to start, Polonius, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern showed up at what seemed to me a little too early. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they were there for some ulterior motive, especially in Polonius's case. I've said it before, and I will say it again. I really cannot stand that guy. Hamlet immediately put them to work trying to get the players ready, and I'm almost positive it was just because he wanted to get them out of the way, as once the three of them had all disappeared backstage, Hamlet pulled Horatio aside. Now, I promised myself after the incident last episode where I overheard a very private conversation between Hamlet and Ophelia that I was going to try not to eavesdrop anymore. However, my curiosity got the better of me, so I stayed. To be honest, most of what I heard the two of them talking about was just a really touching conversation between Hamlet and Horatio about their friendship. It was probably the most genuine I have seen Hamlet since the time I've known him. I didn't hear the full conversation as my conscience got the better of me and I decided to leave them to themselves. However, as I was slipping out of the back of the auditorium, I heard Hamlet say something very peculiar. I couldn't make out exactly what he said, but I think it was something about observing and one of the scenes in the play being particularly important. I waited around in the theater lobby until the play was supposed to start. Eventually, it seemed like half the town showed up, all eager to see the play their prodigal son had put together. Among the crowd were such familiar faces as Claudius, Gertrude, Polonius, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, and Ophelia. Out in the lobby with everyone, Hamlet's mood instantly changes. His witty remarks became more and more outlandish and his behavior much more erratic. In that moment, I could see why half the town thinks he's gone mad. As everyone started filing into the theater, I heard Gertrude ask Hamlet to go and sit with her. He rather loudly and rather rudely declined, and instead went to go sit next to Ophelia in the front row. I didn't hear what he was saying, and to be honest, I didn't want to, but the poor thing looked so uncomfortable. Once everyone was seated, the lights started to dim, and the play began. Now, before I keep going, I think a brief aside into why I particularly love watching live theater is necessary. Earlier, I overheard Hamlet saying something to the players about how theater is an imitator and a mirror of real life. I couldn't agree more. In my opinion, live theater has a unique way of reflecting people's dreams, hopes, and fears on a stage right before their eyes. Not only do I love watching theater, but I love watching people watch theater. I've found that how people react to theater reveals a lot about them. When they laugh, when they cry, when they get angry, it all reveals interesting things about a person's character. For tonight's play, I was lucky enough to be sitting in a raised press box next to Horatio. And, seeing as I spent most of the day watching the actors rehearse and had probably seen the whole play at least twice, I spent most of my time watching the audience's reactions. The subject matter of the play itself was pretty interesting. It started with a king and a queen who seemed very much in love. Upon the king pronouncing that he is going to die soon, the queen swears that she will never love again after he is gone. Somewhat oddly, The king doesn't believe her and declares that she will likely break her promise. Again, the queen swears she will never love again and then leaves the stage. After she's left, the king's nephew comes on, poisons the king, crowns himself king, and then woos the queen. Loyal listeners, if that plot sounds incredibly familiar to you, I don't think that's a coincidence. Looking out into the crowd, the similarities between the play and recent events in Elsinore certainly weren't lost on some members of the audience. Many appeared to be blissfully ignorant and were enraptured by the play. Some got teary-eyed at the death of the king. Others, however, started looking around and shifting uncomfortably in their seats, as if to see if anyone else was picking up on the same things they were seeing. As I was observing the audience, I saw Rosencrantz and Guildenstern way in the back row. Rosencrantz, I'll be honest, seemed somewhat oblivious, and it was very evident that he was ogling some of the female actresses. Guildenstern, on the other hand, seemed uncharacteristically serious. I'm pretty sure he kept sneaking glances up at the private box where Claudius and Gertrude were sitting, and I'm beginning to wonder if their happy-go-lucky attitude is hiding something more. I let my eyes drift up to the box to look at Gertrude, and be true in my heart I pitied the poor woman. I watched her while the queen gave her speech about never loving again should her husband die, and Gertrude looked so uncomfortable, though she hid it very well. However, underneath her mask of poise, I saw what looked like an interesting mix of frustration and sadness. Also, in the moment where the queen left the king alone on the stage, I saw a flash of what I could have sworn was guilt sweep across her features. While I was watching Gertrude, I saw Polonius out of the corner of my eye. Given his previous boasts about his former acting career, I was shocked to see that he wasn't paying much attention to the play at all. Instead, he seemed to be intently watching Ophelia and Hamlet in the front row. Ophelia, for her part, appeared to be watching the play with rapt attention, though that might have had more to do with her trying to avoid looking at Hamlet sitting next to her. She was clearly uncomfortable, and she was leaning so far to the right of her seat as if to put as much distance between her and Hamlet as possible. I could see Hamlet making comments to her, but her eyes never left the stage. I did see her glance his way once when he wasn't looking. It was at the exact moment when the king had finished speaking about his and the queen's happy memories. She looked at him with such piteous and profound longing, it made my heart hurt. Ophelia wasn't the only one sneaking glances at Hamlet. Horatio was sitting next to me the entire time, and though I wasn't looking at him, I could hear his body shifting and head turning as he alternated from looking to the stage to the mayor's box, and finally to Hamlet. I'm almost positive that when the actor playing the king said a line about love leading fortune or fortune leading love, I heard Horatio let out a silent sigh. I didn't see where he was looking at that moment, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say he was looking at a certain someone in the front row. Hamlet was, well, being Hamlet the entire time. Like I said, I think he spent most of the play making comments at Ophelia, trying to get some sort of response out of her. But his eyes never really seemed to be fixated on the stage. They were either looking at Ophelia or looking up at Claudius and Gertrude in the mayor's box. I'm going to be honest and say I wasn't really looking at Claudius the entire time, but when it seemed like both Hamlet and Horatio's eyes were firmly fixed on him, I couldn't resist looking as well. When I did look at Claudius, his face looked red, and I could see beads of sweat on his brow. His whole body leaned towards the stage, but his eyes couldn't stop darting around. He looked like a man who was worried that he was being watched. And listeners, I swear I am not making this up, but when the king's nephew poured poison into the king's ear on the stage, Claudius shot up so fast and instantly called for the play to stop. At once, the lights came up and Claudius ran out of the theater so fast with Polonius and Gertrude on his heels. Slowly, everyone got up out of their seats and started making their way out of the theater as well. Horatio immediately went to go talk to Hamlet, but I stayed away to listen to the townspeople's chatter as they mingled out, still trying to make sense of what had just happened to myself. I finally made it over to Hamlet and Horatio in time to hear Guildenstern tell Hamlet that his mother wanted to speak with him. Now, I am very happy that I came over at this time because I made it just in time to hear one of the finest burns I have ever heard in my life. Hamlet had grabbed one of the actors' flutes from the orchestra pit and was asking Guildenstern to play it. Guildenstern kept repeating that he didn't know how, but Hamlet kept insisting. I'm going to repeat what Hamlet said verbatim because it was just too good, and it has been ringing in my head since I heard it. He looked Guildenstern dead in the eye and said, "Why, look you now, how unworthy a thing you make of me. You would play upon me. You would seem to know my stops. You would pluck out the heart of my mystery. You would sound me from my lowest note to the top of my compass. And there is much music, excellent voice in this little organ. Yet can you not make it speak? Splud, do you think I am easier to be played upon than a pipe?" It truly was one of the most beautiful outbursts I had ever heard, and it somewhat confirmed my suspicion that there was more going on to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern than meets the eye. It also confirmed my suspicion that there was more substance and reason to the way Hamlet's been acting. I know he seems mad, but I don't think he is mad. Anyway, the moment was interrupted by Polonius coming in and also telling Hamlet that his mother wanted to speak to him. At this point, it was getting close to midnight and my mind was reeling, so I bid Hamlet and Horatio good night and I walked back to my hotel room, trying to process everything that I had just witnessed and observed. That is partially why I instantly sat down to record, hoping that giving voice to my thoughts might make them easier to understand. It's just shy of 1 a.m. right now, so I'm about to upload this episode for you all, go to sleep, and resume the investigation tomorrow. Things surely can't get any weirder, can they? Well, anyway, till next time, sweet listeners, good night, and may flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.